Hey friends, welcome to the Arable Leader podcast again. I'm Karl Martin, and we're recording this episode one day out of the US presidential election. And so a time when leadership is in massive focus, we're going to be talking about leadership. And once again, this is a question and response episode. So I don't actually know what questions I'm going to be asked, but I love these kind of contexts where I get to talk about leadership with real questions that people have about the leadership that is theirs and the leadership they see in front of them. This is the Arable Leader podcast. I'm Karl Martin, and we're exploring true, brave, kind, curious leadership, leading from your soul. So today I want to introduce one of my colleagues, JP, and JP stands for Jeffrey Parker. Sometimes I call him Spider-Man, but JP's a fantastic member of our team, and he's going to be posing some questions that I know not what yet. So go ahead, JP.
Okay. Well, you've teed it up in the context of the election. So while not all of our questions are around the election, we do have a few that came in that are really pertinent. So why don't we start with this? I actually think this is a really thoughtful question. How can leaders foster unity in a polarized environment without compromising their principles?
Wow. Great question. I feel like if there is an answer to that, and it's a massively relevant conversation because the world that we're living in right now has moved further and further to polarization. And partly that's because of the press and the media that we get, and we listen to what we listen to, and the algorithm gives us things that we already believe in, and so that's a massive problem for us. But how do you stay relevant? How do you stay listening? How do you stay in unity? How do you stay in harmony whilst holding on to something you fundamentally believe? I think it starts with recognizing that you're the project, but you're not the object. In other words, it's about you. It's about creating for yourself a belief system and an understanding of what you stand the weight of your life on and who you are and how you show up and doing your work. But ultimately, it's not all about you. It's about other people. The world is bigger than you, wider than you, longer than you, and will last further than you. I'm pretty obsessed by the idea that Abraham Maslow, when he developed his hierarchy of human needs, came to a realization on his deathbed that self-actualization was not the pinnacle of human needs. Actually, self-transcendence was. Now, that doesn't get published a lot and doesn't get spoken about a lot because it doesn't fit into our individualistic concepts and philosophy in our society. But if we would just embrace that thought, that the pinnacle of human belief is transcendence, self-transcendence, that we would begin to live for others, we begin to live beyond ourselves, and we would stop being so self-serving, self-obsessed, self-regulating, and we would become much more concerned about what's going on all around us. We would end up with this tension, not balance, between creating environments where we stand for what we believe and opening ourselves up with curiosity to what other people believe, and then we stand a chance of having unity and harmony.
I mean, I think it's hard to maintain curiosity if you're completely obsessed with just trying to prove a point. That curiosity is what keeps the conversation going, and it has to be a conversation.
And stop taking yourself so seriously. The reality is that if you were really honest about yourself, you don't know everything, and you mess up things, and you get things wrong. And so therefore there is space for other people to know things that you don't know. And if you close yourself off and you become like this echo chamber of your own thinking, then not only do you become very defensive and very guarded and very comfort zoney, but actually you can never create something bigger than yourself.
Wow. There's another question that comes on the back of that I think is really helpful, particularly for leaders in positions where they have to communicate to a lot of people. especially in diverse teams. How can a leader communicate effectively with both supporters and critics in such a way that fosters an open dialogue and doesn't shut other people down?
Well, I think you have to be very clear about what you really believe and what you really think. And the reason I say that is because I, for example, am very much a people person and very much a feeler. So I am an empath. I read what's going on in the room. And if I'm not careful, I want to play the role that I should play in a room in order to bring about the solutions that I think we should bring about. And so being very clear before you enter a room or enter a space about the non-negotiables, about the things that you die on a hill for, or when you cut me, I believe these things, helps you begin to realize that that you're going to be true to your position, whether you're speaking to supporters or critics. Now, the second part of that, I think, is understanding that in order to win an argument, in order to win your way, in order to pitch some new idea to the world, you're going to have to be able to convince some of both. And therefore, the conversation becomes, what do I need to say and who do I need to be to allow people who might one day embrace my way of thinking to be able to come on this journey? That enables you to stop creating false and unhelpful boundaries and false and unhelpful offenses and allow only the core idea and the core belief and the core truth to be the thing that offends somebody. Because, you know, we all add our own stuff to things. We all add our own pieces to our own pieces to the puzzle. And in reality, what we want to do, I think, is get to, I think part of the problem that we've got in our culture right now is that we become so defensive and so mistrusting and so distrusting of others that we end up defending all the wrong things. We end up taking everything so personally. We end up pushing ourselves further and further into positions of our own making that we cannot remove ourselves from, and therefore we can't have a conversation that comes to a middle ground or to a place of solution. And you know, I think, without being overly political, I think that's where we've gotten to in America, in the huge polarization of not just politics, but the way in which we think and talk to one another. You know, if someone is wholly right or wholly wrong, if I am attacked, I must defend. No, come on, guys. That's not how, when we look at the full body of evidence of how the world has worked over the last thousands and thousands of years, that's not how you come to great, creative, progressive, forward-thinking solutions. We have to be able to embrace those who are challenging us, embrace those who are supporting us, and find different ways of thinking. And often those different ways of thinking, I think, are not linear. They're not rational. You know, we've become obsessed, I think, ever since the Greek thinkers in rational thought. That has won the day. And yet, every single significant breakthrough that we've ever seen in our society has come from non-rational thought, ideation thought, creative thought, left field thought. And we have to find ways to champion that. And those pieces of thinking never happen in the silos of comfort zone or polarization. They happen in being able to think a way someone else thinks. They happen in being able to have a conversation that no one is having right now in order to come to a solution that no one has gotten to right now.
I remember when I was a kid, one of the things that they instructed me to look for was, you know, my parents, everybody said, oh, that person's a good role model. You thought of leaders in culture as role models, basketball players, or, whether it was a sports person or a politician or, an artist. And I don't hear that rhetoric much anymore about role models. But if you were thinking about kind of the leaders of the future and these next leaders we need to be looking at in our culture, what are the characteristics of the next wave of role models? Like, if we were really looking to people to say, I want to be like that person, what are those characteristics that we should be looking for? Because it seems like the conversation's completely shifted to everything you're talking about. Does this person believe all the things I believe? Do they accept the things that I accept? And if, I'm now it's just a blanket statement. We agree. So I'll follow this person. But actually, is there something deeper we should be looking for?
Yes, absolutely. And the answer is absolutely. And that's why I've written the book I've written. That's why we have the organization, the company, the business that we have, because we are passionate about character leadership. We're passionate about the moral integrity of leaders, because we think that that base level of those kind of qualities results in the kind of actions that change the world in a very positive way. So we're obsessed with that. I think we need to be very careful, though, that we don't make the mistake of thinking that we used to have statesmen and women and we don't anymore. Because I think we clearly used to have some incredible people, and we still have some incredible people. What is also true is that never before has leadership been under the spotlight or the microscope than it is right now, because everyone is present all the time. Everything is public all the time. You can't have a conversation with somebody without it being reported. Whereas, our heroes of yesteryear did a whole bunch of really bad things and no one was filming them, right? So let's be kind of careful and not think we used to have these great people and now we don't have these great people. However, that doesn't give us an excuse to say, oh, we don't need to worry about character. We absolutely need to worry about character. My frustration with the current political situation is that we spend so much time arguing about this leader over this leader, or this leader's functions over this leader's dysfunctions, or this leader's track record over this leader's track record. And of course, those things are important because we have to follow these people, we have to listen to these people, and we have to keep these people accountable. I am significantly more interested in how we raise the next generation and the generation after that by putting into the water the right kind of moral, character, values, and ways of behaving that will result in the kind of actions that we really need for the crisis that our world is in right now. So in short, the true, brave, kind, curious qualities that we talk about, we believe will equip leaders with the kind of mindsets, heart sets, and then skill sets that will mean that instead of worrying about this candidate over this candidate, we literally have thousands and thousands of leaders in every sphere of culture. Doctors, lawyers, politicians, sportsmen and women, business leaders, who elevate the moral framework of our society to being the kind of place where we don't resort to the kind of petty polarization that we're in right now.
Wow. I'm curious. There's a question that came in on Instagram from one of our followers that said that actually is asking you to narrow it down to one. And I'm not sure if we do that because we have true, brave, kind, and curious.
Narrow what down to one quality?
Her question is this: what is the most vital leadership quality? And then she asked the converse: what is the most destructive leadership quality?
Oh wow!
I'd wonder how you'd answer that.
Yeah. Well, you would expect me to say all four, but I will say this, that if you don't start with true, if you don't know who you are, if you don't know what it feels like to be the other side of you, if you don't know why you are, if you don't know why you show up the way you show up, if you don't know why you bleed the things you bleed, then you're off to a really bad start in trying to be the kind of leader that you desperately want to be. So it's not that true is the most important, it's just that it's the starting point. You have to start with bringing the subconscious into the conscious so that you can make choices about how you are in this world. Otherwise, that subconscious will just control your actions and therefore your outcomes. So true. Give me the luxury of mentioning one other. I would mention curiosity. I've said on a number of other occasions that kindness is the strongest quality, but I would mention curiosity, and I would mention it for this reason, that I think that curiosity is the catalyzing factor in these four qualities. if you are not curious, in other words, if every day is not a school day, if you're not always open to learning, if you don't come with an open mind and an open heart to teams and situations, organizations and problems, then you can be true and you can be brave and you can be kind, but that true, brave, and kind will be static. If you add to the true, brave, and kind, curious, then you can be truer, braver, kinder, and it all goes up and to the right. So it truly is a catalyzing quality that makes you question your truth. It makes you question your bravery and purpose and focus. It makes you question your kindness and whether you can be actually more others-centered. As far as the most toxic of all leadership qualities, I don't know. I would maybe I would go for selfishness. Maybe I would say that if you cannot live for the other, if you cannot live for the next generation, if you cannot serve for something beyond you, then you can never have the leadership. In fact, it's probably not even leadership. It's just self-interest. And I actually think it's probably the most toxic of all leadership qualities, has become that way because of an obsession about radical individualism that our culture has gotten, which I think has created little despots, individual popes, people who have the truth and hold the truth, and it is the truth. And I think it's the most devastating of all leadership qualities to be in it for yourself and in it for yourself alone. In fact, no one trusts you if that's the reality of your life. That
makes me think of something I heard you say recently about this idea of it's not wrong to want to lead. And in fact, it's a good thing. People should want to lead. But what you just said there tells me what people are actually asking for is to not be selfish, is to actually be the opposite of that, is to say, if I want to lead, it means I want to promote the best for others. And so many people, I think 100%. We think of leadership as this selfish thing, or I'm after its ambition alone.
Yeah, exactly. And we see leadership as a grab for power, and we see power as useful for that individual person alone. And I want to say that if leadership is true leadership, it's the development of other leaders, because we believe that leadership is the greatest of human skills, because it influences people and it impacts culture. If you're going to engage in leadership in this purest of forms, it's going to take sacrifice of your own gain and your own ideas and sometimes your own benefit, for the benefit of something bigger, for the benefit of something longer, for the benefit of something wider. And if you begin to think of leadership like that, it's a noble pursuit. Go after it with everything you've got, but we have to teach it in the right way. Otherwise it becomes a land grab.
Wow. I've got a bit of a pivot. This was a friend of mine who is an entrepreneur that sent in this question. This is what he says: "It's lonely at the top is a cliche, but the entrepreneurial or leadership journey can feel incredibly lonely long before you ever get to the top. What practices, resources, or tools can leaders use to ensure they're not walking that road alone, even when leadership feels really isolating?"
Yeah, that's really good. Well, it is a cliche, and it's a cliche because there's truth in it, right? If you are going to lead in this noble way, you are going to find yourself exposed, and sometimes as a leader, you find yourself out ahead of other people because you think before they think. And that's part of the game. You have an idea that is not always popular, but you go after it. And so there is a sense of loneliness. It just, to my mind, makes the intentional practice of relationship vital. all leadership is relational leadership because it's about leading people. And so if you're not supported by people and have good people around you and get intentional around those relationships, whether they're in your place of work or outside of your place of work, you're not going to survive. I find it fascinating that the pandemic, which should have taught us something about the necessity of human relationship and the necessity of face-to-face, flesh-on-flesh, if you like. Sounds rude, but you know what I mean. Kind of relation. It should have taught us about that stuff because we all longed for the human contact and realized that's what it means to be human. In many instances, it taught us the opposite. It taught us that we can do this really well, and therefore we might not need the human contact and context. In a world where remote working, digital nomads, all that kind of stuff is real, and I think it's here to stay. We have to be intentional about relationships and go after them. Communicate, because in the absence of communication, in the vacuum of communication, we assume negativity and we damage relationships. It's the way we're wired. So I think communication is vital. I think deciding who are going to be our close friends and being super intentional about making sure we tell them that they're our closest friends and we're going to go after them and we invite them into every arena of our life in order to comment and be thought partners and to walk alongside us, to actually be friends. Doing things together. My team are located in Los Angeles and in London, and in Chicago and in Nashville. And we have to be super intentional about meeting both virtually and in person. And twice a year we fly everyone out. We meet together for a few days. And from my perspective, that's as much around just building relationships with one another than it is about actually doing strategy and making plans for the year. So you have to be intentional. You have to go after it. You have to build relationships, or your isolation and your loneliness will become a disease for you. And you will begin to be an echo chamber of your own thinkings and your own really bad ideas. And you will begin to, if you're not careful, become a victim to that isolation and loneliness and think the world is against you when actually it isn't. And then you become the worst kind of all leaders. You become selfish.
Wow. You mentioned something there about being intentional in these relationships. We had another question that's kind of on this, but maybe at a different stage in the leadership journey. She asks, how and where do you find your people?
I think you find your people from your people. In other words, I think work out who your people are and then begin to look beyond them to their people, and then you begin to find your people. So I don't think that the whole kind of I'm beyond in my thinking or beyond the whole networking thing and I'm going to find people like me. No, I look to people that are running with me and walk with me and like me and are attracted to the way in which I think. And I look to their people and I begin to realize that my network is way bigger because their network is bigger. So your people will help you find your people.
Yeah, you find your people from your people. That's amazing. So when you find yourself as a new leader or a leader in a new place and know that change needs to happen in order for growth to be realized, I think this might be very relevant depending on, maybe there's a new person in office come this time tomorrow. How do you work within the systems and culture that are already present to bring about meaningful changes? And are there any rules of thumb for how quickly a new leader can make those changes?
No, I mean, I'm not convinced that there are rules of thumb. I think, lots of people will tell you differently. You get a honeymoon period of 90 days and you've got to change everything in 90 days. I think everyone knows about that. And so it's no longer it's no longer a device you can really use because everyone's kind of measuring you on your 90-day thing. So I don't know about that. I'm sure there's truth in it. But I guess I think that, we're in a world where step change is needed. You know, we none of us can pretend that our cultures are not broken, our leadership is not broken. We're in this super VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world. And this change is not just normal, but it's necessary right now around us. And so in that moment, I think, here's my play on it. I think if you can make your revolution feel like evolution, it's super more likely to land. That's not an English sentence, but you know what I'm trying to say. If your revolution can feel like evolution, people will be able to embrace it. If your challenge can feel equally supportive, then people can come on a journey with you. In other words, it's not just about what you've got to do, it's how you're going to do it. You can't do a good thing in a bad way, baptize it and call it great. So finding the way in which it will be most palatable to people is always going to be super helpful. I also think that it's helpful to realize that our predecessors, whilst we may have disagreed with them, were generally not bad people, and they generally, not always, found themselves in positions of leadership because they had something to add and something helpful. So the concept of we change up against yesterday's dysfunction with an equal and opposite dysfunction is really an unhelpful way of thinking. I think we need to understand that we don't honor our forefathers by embracing their practices. We honor them by embracing their principles. So there are principles that have been baked into our society, our business, our family that are really healthy principles. It's just that in every generation, you have to break some of the vehicles that carried those principles and create your own ones, because life changes and context change and culture changes. So honoring the past, but recognizing the need for action in the present because you have a future that is different is going to be really helpful. Taking people with you is vital. Otherwise, you're just going on a very lonely walk. And in doing that by making your revolution feel like evolution might be a good way to start.
And so now, if you're on the other side of that, how can leaders know when it's time to transition power or step down, or when their position might still feel secure? What are there signs to look for?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I've said before, and I'll keep saying this, I am so tired of the succession conversation. I'm tired of being employed to come and help people with a succession problem. Of course, I'll do it because I've got some ideas and some thoughts, but I would much rather have an apprenticeship culture conversation about how we can, from the very moment that we're hired, begin to think about how we pass this on in a better way than when we took hold of it in the first place. How we raise everyone up, everyone with a map, everyone with a guide, everyone growing in their development, their leadership development, and their people development, their human skills development. I think that if we do that, then we have fewer and fewer succession problems at the end of the day. But if you're asking, how do I know when my time is done? I suspect most people know. They pretty much know. They kind of go, they know when they're getting slower. They know when someone's doing better. They know when the organization will be better off by having someone else at the helm. But it is our ego that keeps holding on to things. And I think the antidote to that ego wanting to hold on to things is three thoughts. One is the thought of stewardship as opposed to ownership, or stewardship before ownership. By which I mean, if you own things and hold things as if it's yours, your business, your company, your position, your leadership role, then if you're not careful, it will begin to possess you, very Lord of the Ringsy, my precious stuff. But if you can hold things like this, and you can have a longer term view about the legacy that you will leave, if you can have a bigger picture about the people around you and a deeper idea about what your leadership journey is about, then it'll be easier to let go of the role and the position at the right moment. I think secondly, it's super helpful to ask the question, what's more useful for the organization, the company, the business, the charity, as opposed to what's going to be most helpful for me. And thirdly, just very practically, have some good friends who will call you an idiot when you're being an idiot. Have some people around you who will say it's time. And when they tell you it's time, it's time. When someone who loves you says it's time, it's time. It was probably time a year ago, but it's definitely time now. And you just need to find a good way to transition. That's not about succession. It's just about helpful transition, so you don't just abdicate responsibility, you pass it on.
That's so good. I was actually having a conversation with an older friend of mine last night, and he was a police officer for 30 years. And one of the things that he mentioned to me was, he said, I'm finding a lot of fulfilling things to do, and I'm enjoying my time now. But there are some days where I miss the identity that came along, that was just handed to me by being a police officer. Everybody knew the value that I contributed to society. Everybody, and it was just assumed. And he said, so some days I still kind of go looking, where is that value? And I don't know if there's a question in there. I thought that was a really powerful statement coming from somebody who's further down the line. How would you speak to someone who is in that mode of transition, who's maybe acknowledged, it's time to move on, but how do I feel the weight of my value, my identity, my contribution in this next season?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, we're all different, right? And we all put our identity and our value in. We all, to a certain extent, put our identity and our value in things that we shouldn't put our identity and value in. Some of us put it in our relationships. Some of us put it in our job titles. Some of us in our money. Some of us in our kids. I think it's why I'm always encouraging people to go to a deeper place and say, well, what does it mean to be you? Because if what it means to be me is I'm a police officer, then it's a very fragile identity. That can be taken away from you like that, right? Even if it's what it means to me is I'm a mother or a father or whatever, that's still a fragile identity. What it means to be me is an incredibly rich and diverse amount of characteristics, personality traits, roles, opportunities, relationships, experiences. And if you have that rich tapestry and understanding of how you are and who you are and how you show up, then you can leave behind a role, or you can lose some relationships and not be totally flawed and devastated by it, because you are wider, bigger, and deeper and longer than all of those things. You are you. So I think that's one of the reasons why we do so much work on identity and injuries and influences and all the things that we do when it comes to finding, making the subconscious conscious and putting it on the table.
When facing a long and grueling challenge, are there any specific signs you look for that signal it's time to zoom out and reassess, it's time to give up and, call it and go home, or I just need to keep fighting, I just need to persist? And how do you know if in that slog, how do you know if you've lost sight of the larger vision?
Yeah. Well, it's very difficult. And it's very difficult particularly because so many of us are wired to win. And we don't understand that actually oftentimes our losses are our wins. My father once said to me when I was a young leader, he said, why do you feel like you have to win every battle? The secret to your leadership success will be learning which battles to lose, and which to walk away from, and when to lick your wounds. So you can get back in the fight again. Now, that's very militaristic language, and I'm sure some of you won't like that, but you understand the point I'm making, that you cannot physically win every battle. And if you do, you are heading for a cliff. You're heading for a cliff, and you're heading for a major fall. So learning how to lose, and learning when to walk away, and learning when to quit is actually really, really helpful. And I only have two things that I would add to the conversation. One is, if you don't have enough margin in your life, you will never know which battle to fight. You'll never know when you have to lose. You'll never know when to quit. You need space to be able to step back and assess. And the problem that we've got very often in corporate America or corporate Europe is that we just don't have space. We connect our busy to hurry, and therefore we're always reacting. We're not responding. Therefore, we're not asking deeper questions and questioning why we're doing things. And therefore, we just get on this bandwagon of having to win, having to succeed, having to keep going, having to persevere. And we've made perseverance noble and the right thing to do, when sometimes the right thing to do and the noble thing to do is to back off and stop, because you can't win everything. So I think margin is really important, and at some stage in Arable's future, we will record a margin course. How do you create space in your life to be wise? How do you create enough space to be at your most energetic, at your optimum? Those kind of questions. And one of the reasons why that's important is because most of us know that. Well, let me put it this way, JP. If you've ever been in a situation where you've gone for a run or stood in a shower or gone on a walk somewhere, and the problem that you were trying to fix suddenly comes into your mind and gets solved, you'll understand something of how the brain works. And it's kind of autobiographical feature in the brain that reminds you of things that you just cannot access while you're sitting at a whiteboard or on a computer screen or around a table trying to solve a problem. If you don't create margin and space for those moments, you will never fix your problems. That's why it's important to go for a run. That's why it's important to lie out in the sun. That's why it's important to go for a meal and not think about it. That's why all the things that you want to justify. That's why it's important to do those things. And the second thing is, if you don't surround yourself with people who speak truth into your life and say quit, and the kind of people that you love enough and permission enough to give you feedback, then you will never succeed in this life. That's why it's a team sport. It's a team sport. So being able to talk to people and have people in your life who will say, hey, dude, you're killing yourself and you cannot win this battle, and it's good that you walk away. Have those things in play.
Amazing. Thank you, Karl. I
hope that's helpful, my friend. Well, friends, thank you so much for listening and for watching and for being on the podcast. And we're going to continue doing these question and responses. So throw in all your questions, your most gnarly questions, the questions that you would want fixed, the theoretical questions, the practical questions, the tangible stuff. Get it in here, because if you think that any of this is the truth, then you're wrong. All this is concept, idea, opinion, my best stab from my experience as to what I'm currently thinking right now. And they're designed to catalyze your thinking, to start a conversation and to get you to be more curious, because you'll go, I disagree with that, or I love that, or I can take that, or I can develop that, or I can write a book about that. Go for your life. But we'll do more and more of these. Thank you for listening. Thank you, JP. I'm going to get you to answer some questions one day soon, because I think you've got a lot to add, my friend.
Sounds good. I'll do my best.
You've been watching The Arable Leader with Karl Martin. Subscribe for more episodes with great leaders. And you can also listen to The Arable Leader wherever you get your podcasts. For more resources for leading in a healthy way, visit arableco.com and check out Karl's new book, The Cave, the Road, the Table, and the Fire: